All right, so this video is going to be on classifying quadrilaterals. It's our second lesson in our unit. And so yesterday we looked at polygons in general and about classifying them. Now we're going to go back to quadrilaterals, which we know are four-sided shapes, and we're going to classify them based on some properties they have. So this first part of these notes is I'm going to give you all the names of the quadrilaterals that you have to know. Right, and then I'll give you the definition with the blanks that you'll fill in, and then I'm going to give you the picture so that you know what to look for. Okay, so a parallelogram is the first one. That is a quadrilateral with two pairs of opposite not congruent, parallel sides. I can write so a parallelogram has two pairs of opposite parallel sides. So to draw it, I kind of think of it like you make a rectangle-ish, but it's kind of, leaned over a little bit. And then to show the parallel, we put these little arrows on the side. So I'm going to put one pair of arrows here. So that means that those two are parallel. Then I'm going to put another pair on this side, on these two sides, but I'm going to put two arrows. Okay, so if you see that, and only that, that's your clue that it's a parallelogram. Okay, now these next three, rhombus, rectangle, and square, they are all special cases of a parallelogram. So that's why they say a parallelogram with whatever. So not only do they have their own thing, but they also have this aspect of a parallelogram. Okay? So a rhombus, we say that's a parallelogram with four congruent sides. And of course, we know congruent means equal. So a rhombus, you could kind of think of it more like if I can draw it straight. You can almost think about it like a square that's been knocked over, kind of slanted. So these sides are parallel, opposite sides are parallel, but I'm not going to draw that because we've already established it with up here. I'm going to show the congruent sides. So every side gets a little tick mark. So when you see that, that's your clue, it's a rhombus. A rectangle is a parallelogram with four congruent angles. And of course, we know what a rectangle looks like. And so every angle is the same measure. Of course, we know that a rectangle, they're all 90. So there's what a rectangle would look like. And also with a rectangle, you could note that the opposite sides are the same length. You could do that if you wanted to. All right, a square is a parallelogram with four congruent sides and four congruent angles. So every side's the same length and every angle's the same measure. So, draw a square. And to show that, we would show everybody gets one tick mark, and then every angle, is 90. Okay? So next is kite. Kite, it has a strange definition, so I'll write the definition for you and then give you the picture, and I'll try and explain what it means. So a kite is a quadrilateral with two pairs of adjacent not parallel, sorry, wrong word, congruent sides and no opposite congruent sides. Okay, so that's the definition. And then here's your picture. This is what I kind of draw it like. Okay, we all know what a kite looks like, when you flew it on a string as a child. So this is what you would see. Something like that. So notice that the adjacent congruent sides, adjacent is a fancy word for next to. So these two sides right here are next to each other and they're congruent. These two sides are adjacent and they're congruent. But then notice that there are no opposite congruent sides. So if I go from this side across to the other side, they're not the same. Okay? That's what that definition is talking about. So this is the adjacent part and this is the opposite part. All right? So a trapezoid now, kind of what a trapezoid looks like. It is a quadrilateral with exactly one pair of parallel sides. And so I like to draw one like this. This particular shape, the way I'm drawing it right now, may not be as familiar to you as far as the trapezoid goes, because you're probably thinking of isosceles, which is what we're doing right there. But this is a general trapezoid, and the way I've drawn it, this side and this side are my parallels. So they get a parallel. Isosceles trapezoid is probably what you were thinking of when you first thought of trapezoid. It looks like this. That's an isosceles trapezoid. So it is a trapezoid whose opposite non-parallel sides are congruent. Okay, so the way I've drawn this one, this side and this side are parallel, and then the opposite sides that are not parallel are congruent, so they get tick marks. Okay, so these are the shapes you're looking for, and there's the definitions. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to draw a sort of a diagram. And I've turned the paper sideways to give myself some more room, to give myself some more room. And we're going to lay out like the family tree of quadrilaterals. So we're going to start, obviously, at the top with quadrilaterals. And again, quadrilateral just means any shape that has four sides. Okay, then we're going to have three branches. And these branches are going to be based on the amount of parallel sides in your figure. So if you think back to your definitions, there was an option with no sides parallel. There was two with one set of parallel sides. And then there was one that had two sets of parallel sides. Okay, sorry, I had to pause and change the lead in my pencil. Okay, so we've got no sides parallel, one set of parallel sides, two sets of parallel sides. So which one of our shapes had no sides parallel? Well, that would be the kite. And he's over here all by himself. Okay. Who was the first shape that had only one set of parallel sides? Well, that's the trapezoid. And then the first one to have two sets of parallel sides was the parallelogram. Okay? So kite's done. Now trapezoid, we could go one step further and say one set of congruent sides. Okay? When you have the congruent set, that is called the isosceles trapezoid. Okay? From the parallelogram, you start with two different branches because now you're looking at the first branch off would be four congruent, I'm abbreviating, congruent sides. So who was the first to have four congruent sides that we talked about? Well, that was the rhombus. Then you could have four congruent angles. Well, who was the first to have four congruent angles that we talked about? That would be the rectangle. And then finally, the shape that had both four congruent sides and four congruent angles would be the square. Okay? The reason we make this tree is because we're getting ready to classify. And there's two sets of classifications. You can tell me all the names that are applicable, which means you'll go down this list as far as you can, and every stop you make is going to be a name you can put down. Or I could ask you for the most specific name, in which case you will go as far down as you can and then stop. And wherever you stop at is going to be the name. And that may not make sense right now, but it'll make sense when we do the problems here in a minute because it's actually really simple. Okay, but this is how they're all the quadrilaterals are related. Okay, I'm going to keep that to the side because I'm going to come reference back to it. Move it over here. Okay, this is what I was talking about. So your classification problems, there's two kinds. You're going to state all possible names or state the most specific name. So if you are doing the all possible, you'll start at the top, and everybody's going to get this one, quadrilateral. And then either based on what you see, you'll go either to kite, to trapezoid, to parallelogram, and then on down if you can. Okay? So let's look at this one, this first one. Obviously, we put quadrilateral. Because it has four sides. And then then we start looking at if we have any parallel sides. Because remember, that was our first indication, was parallel sides. So how many sets of parallel sides do we have here? We have one. So that means that it is automatically a trapezoid because there's only one set of parallel sides. So then let's go back and look at our table, or our chart. So if there's a set of congruent sides, we can come down and put isosceles trapezoid. Do we have congruent sides? No. The opposite non-parallel sides are not congruent. That's all we can do. We can say that it's a quad and we can say it's a trapezoid. That's it. Okay, let's look at this one. Yes, I realize it's a square, but you have to tell me every name that also goes with it. Okay, so remember you start up at quadrilateral. And then, because we know it's a square, that means we have to come through all of this to get to square, because we're doing all possible names. So that means a square is every one of these. A square is a rhombus. A square is a rectangle. A square is a parallelogram. Okay? So we have to go down that whole list right here, all the way down. So this is also a parallelogram. It's also a rhombus. It's also a rectangle. And it's also a square. Okay? So that's if you're doing all possible names. You just tell me as many as you can that are applicable. The final classification process is you tell me the most specific name. So this time, you're going to go as far down as you can, and wherever you end at, that'll be the most specific name. Okay? Let's look what we have here. We know it's a quad because there's 4 sides, so skip it. So then you have to check for parallel sides. Do you see any parallel sides at all? So we sit and stare at it and look at it, and the answer is no. There are no parallel sides. So the only shape we talked about that had no parallel sides was a kite. So that is the most specific name for that figure. It's a kite. Ooh, mercy. Okay, look at the last one. We know it's a quad because it has 4 sides. We know it's a parallelogram because the opposite sides are parallel, so this side and this side is parallel, and then this side and this side's also parallel. So we know it's a parallelogram. So we know we went from here to here. Now we got to see if we can go to a rhombus or rectangle. So if it's a rectangle, let's start there. If it's a rectangle that has 4 congruent angles, do you see 4 congruent angles? No. Is it a rhombus? Are there 4 congruent sides? Yeah, every side has a tick mark. So this is a rhombus. That's the most specific name you can tell me. Okay, and that's it. That's all you're going to do is classify it. So you either tell me all the names you can or the most specific. Okay? So make sure you watch this video all the way through, and then you work on your assignment. I think there's just 20 problems, so it shouldn't take you too long. As always, if you need help, let me know.